In the history of how nations die, the ending is usually loud. There is the thunder of cannon fire, the march of armies, the scream of shells tearing through cities. But in the 19th century, the greatest empire of the Middle East did not fall to soldiers, fell to accountants. It was not conquered by gunpowder, but by compound interest. This is the story of the first true debt trap of the modern age. A story that proves a brutal geopolitical truth. You do not need to invade a country to own it. You only need to hold its mortgage. To understand how this tragedy began, we must go back to the middle of the 19th century, when the Ottoman Empire still appeared powerful. On the map it was vast. From the Balkans in Europe, across Anatolia, down to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and across the deserts of North Africa. The Sultan ruled from Istanbul, seated at the crossroads of the world. Millions of subjects lived under his banner. For centuries, Europe had feared this empire. But beneath the surface of imperial grandeur, something was deeply wrong. The Ottoman Empire was economically sick. While Britain and France surged forward into the Industrial Revolution, building factories, steam engines, railways, and modern financial systems, the Ottoman economy remained trapped in a medieval past. It was an agrarian empire in a mechanized world. Peasants and craftsmen trying to compete with machines. The state treasury was perpetually empty. The tax system was corrupt and inefficient. Local officials stole much of the revenue before it ever reached Istanbul. For centuries, the Ottomans had survived financial crises by debasing their currency or confiscating wealth from elites. But the modern world no longer tolerated medieval solutions. The empire needed capital. To modernize its army. To defend itself from Russia. To build roads, telegraphs, and infrastructure. To survive as a great power. For generations, the sultans resisted borrowing from Europe. There was a cultural and religious aversion to usury, and a political fear of dependence on Christian powers. But in 1853 everything changed. The Russian Empire invaded Ottoman territory, igniting the Crimean War. It was a massive conflict, and one the Ottomans could not afford. Britain and France intervened to block Russian expansion. They sent fleets, they sent armies, and they sent bankers. The war drained the Ottoman treasury at an impossible rate. Soldiers had to be paid, weapons manufactured, ships provisioned. Sultan Abdülmecid I was desperate. His advisors told him there was no alternative. To save the empire, he would have to break the ancient taboo. In 1854, the Ottoman Empire signed its first foreign loan agreement with British and French bankers. It was presented as help from allies. In reality, it was the first shackle of a golden chain. The terms were brutal. The loan was issued at 80% of its face value. For every £100 of debt, the empire received only 80 in cash. But interest was charged on the full 100. The bankers kept the difference as commission and risk. This was the original sin of Ottoman finance. The empire borrowed expensively and received less than it owed. Still, when the gold arrived in Istanbul, it felt like a miracle. The army was paid. The crisis eased. Russia was eventually defeated. And the Sultan learned a dangerous lesson. With a signature in London, gold could be summoned. The war ended in 1856. But the borrowing did not. The Ottoman elite had tasted easy credit and became addicted. They looked at Paris and London, glowing with gaslights and marble palaces, and felt humiliated. They wanted Istanbul to look European. They wanted proof that they were not the sick man of Europe. But instead of investing in industry, education, or productivity, they spent on prestige. The ultimate symbol of that vanity was Dolmabahce Palace. Sultan Abdülmecid decided the old Topkapi Palace was outdated, too Asian, too old. He wanted a palace that could rival Versailles, a palace that would impress Europe. Dolmabahce was staggering in its luxury. 14 tons of gold leaf. The world's largest crystal chandelier. Italian marble. Silk carpets. Crystal staircases. It was breathtaking. And it was a tombstone. The palace cost 5 million Ottoman gold liras, nearly a quarter of the empire's annual tax revenue. It was built entirely with borrowed money, while Anatolian peasants plowed dry soil with wooden tools. The Sultan imported crystal from Bohemia and gold from France. To fund it, he returned again and again to European bankers, each loan deeper than the last. By the 1860s, the empire was trapped in a financial illusion. It could no longer pay interest on old loans without taking new ones. A Ponzi scheme masquerading as state finance. In 1860, debt payments consumed 15% of government revenue. By 1870, over 50%. Half of every coin collected, from farmers, fishermen, merchants, was shipped directly to London and Paris. There was no money left for schools. No money for roads. No money for defense. The state was hollowing itself out from the inside. And the worst was yet to come. As the Ottoman treasury collapsed, the government turned to emergency lenders closer to home. They were known as the Galata bankers, wealthy Greek and Armenian financiers based in Istanbul. When the treasury ran dry, these men lent money at crushing short-term rates. 10%, 20%, sometimes higher. It was financial suicide. By this time, Sultan Abdulaziz ruled the empire, a man driven by pride and obsession with military power. He didn't just build palaces. He built a navy, determined to rival Britain. He ordered massive ironclad warships from British shipyards, modern artillery from Germany. On paper, the Ottoman navy became the third largest in the world. In reality, it was unusable. There was no money for coal, no money for maintenance. The ships rusted in harbor, floating monuments to debt. Then came 1873. A financial panic erupted in Vienna and spread across Europe, triggering the Long Depression. Global credit froze. European banks stopped lending. At the same time, nature turned against the Ottomans. Catastrophic droughts struck Anatolia. Crops failed. Livestock died. Famine spread. Tax collectors entered villages and found nothing to collect. Revenue collapsed. Debt payments did not. By 1875, the numbers no longer lied. Grand Vizier Mahmud Nedim Pasha stared at the ledgers and knew the truth. The treasury was empty. A major debt payment was due. No lender would help. The empire faced a terrible choice. Starve its people to pay foreign creditors, or stop paying. On October 6, 1875, the Ottoman government issued the Decree of Ramadan. Debt payments were cut in half. 50% in cash. 50% in paper promises. Diplomatically, it was a moratorium. Financially, it was a default. Europe erupted in outrage. Millions of middle-class investors in Britain and France held Ottoman bonds. Savings vanished overnight. Newspapers called the Ottomans thieves. Political support collapsed. And weakness invited attack. In 1877, Russia declared war. The Russo-Turkish War was a disaster. Ottoman soldiers fought bravely, but unpaid, undersupplied, and exhausted. Russian troops marched to the outskirts of Istanbul. They could see the domes of Hagia Sophia. The empire was forced to surrender. Territory was lost. And worse, a massive war indemnity was imposed. Over 800 million francs owed to Russia. Now the empire owed everyone, and could pay no one. The total debt exceeded the value of the entire economy. The Ottoman Empire was insolvent. Sultan Abdülhamid II understood the truth. He ruled a corpse. But Britain and France did not want to conquer Ottoman land. That would require armies, administration, defense. They had a better idea. They would conquer the empire financially. In 1881, European creditors arrived in Istanbul, not as generals but as bankers. They demanded control of revenue. The result was the Decree of Muharrem. It created the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, the OPDA, a foreign-run corporation headquartered in Istanbul. It was unprecedented. European bankers now controlled Ottoman taxes. tobacco, silk, fishing, alcohol, legal documents, all transferred to foreign hands. The OPDA built its own armed bureaucracy, over 5,000 collectors enforcing payment. They answered not to the Sultan, but to banks in Europe. It was a state within a state. By 1914, the OPDA controlled nearly 1/3 of all Ottoman revenue. 1 out of every 3 coins left the country. The empire could not invest, could not modernize, could not escape poverty. Sovereignty had been replaced by solvency. And then came Germany. While Britain and France extracted wealth, Germany offered partnership, railways, industry, military support. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway became the new hope. But the contracts were ruthless. Guaranteed profits, resource rights, new debt. The empire simply changed creditors. By 1914, the Ottomans were trapped. When World War I began, they gambled everything on Germany. They hoped victory would erase their debts. They expelled the OPDA, stopped payments, felt free briefly. They lost. The empire died. But the debt lived on. When modern Turkey was founded in 1923, Europe returned with ledgers. You inherit the land, they said. You inherit the mortgage. Turkey paid. The final payment was made in 1954, 100 years after the first loan. The lesson is simple. Debt is power. And sovereignty dies quietly, one interest payment at a time.